I want you to picture yourself for a second. You are at work in a really high-stakes, fast-paced environment, and you are just making decisions on pure autopilot.
Oh, yeah. We all do it.
Right. You're firing off emails, you're managing your team, and you're relying on the exact same strategies that worked for you like 10 years ago.
Exactly. Even when the world around you has completely changed.
Yeah, and that's the core of what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. I am really excited about this one.
Me too. It is such a fascinating topic.
And if you're joining us, just know that this is not a lecture. We are just two people discovering this together, thinking aloud. And today, our mission is to explore this gap between just knowing something and actually doing it when the ground is shifting beneath your feet.
Right, the execution part.
Yeah, and we're going to look at a concept that was coined back in the 1970s. This was by a developmental psychologist named John H. Flavel, and the term is metacognition.
Metacognition, it's a big word.
It is, but it basically just literally translates to thinking about your thinking.
Which, it sounds a bit abstract initially, almost like a riddle you'd hear in a philosophy class or something.
Totally.
But the reality is that metacognition is this highly practical, rigorously studied cognitive framework. I mean, it is the fundamental difference between operating on that blind autopilot you just mentioned and actually having the cognitive agility to recognize when the rules of your environment have changed.
And we are going to really break down the anatomy of this today. We're going to explore the actual mechanics of decision-making. We'll look at how top executives avoid these massive, catastrophic strategic failures.
Oh, there are some great case studies for that.
Yeah, and we're also going to unpack this literal life or death survival story from a wildfire in Mann Gulch. We want to uncover why human beings are just so terrified of dropping their tools.
It's such a visceral story.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, because you, listening right now, are likely someone navigating a complex professional landscape yourself. Maybe you are an international professional and you're actively trying to refine your strategic communication in English, right? Or maybe you just love human psychology.
Which is why we're also going to highlight the specific English phrasing and grammatical structures that professionals use to articulate these really high-level ideas.
Exactly, because that linguistic component is just vital.
It really is. The vocabulary we use, the grammar we deploy to, reflect on our failures, it actually provides the scaffolding for high-level thought. If you don't have the language to articulate a complex reality, you're going to struggle to even conceptualize it.
Spot on. And I do want to mention right up front that this exploration is brought to life by Fluentora. For those of you who really want to turn the insights from today's conversation into actionable skills, Fluentora.com pairs deep dives exactly like this one with comprehensive lesson plans.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
They really focus on that intersection between advanced language acquisition and true cognitive development. So if you want to master the grammar of strategic reflection we talk about today, they have the resources for you.
Absolutely.
But let's dive into the core problem here.
Yeah.
I want to start with this idea of the autopilot. Like, what is physically happening in our brains when we are just executing tasks and using those decade-old strategies?
Well, to understand the danger of that autopilot, we first have to really understand the biological imperative behind it. Psychologists actually refer to this default state as level 1 cognition.
Level 1 cognition.
Yeah. You can basically think of it as the survival brain.
Yeah.
Because, your brain is incredibly greedy when it comes to energy consumption. It uses something like 20% of your body's entire caloric intake.
Wow, just to run the brain.
Exactly. So from a purely evolutionary standpoint, thinking deeply is biologically expensive. It costs you a lot of energy.
So it wants to avoid it.
Right. When you are faced with a dilemma, your level 1 cognition just wants to resolve it as quickly and cheaply as possible. It absolutely does not want to analyze a problem from multiple angles.
Okay, wait, let me test my understanding here. Are you essentially saying that our brains are fundamentally wired to be lazy? Like, we are biologically incentivized to just take the path of least resistance.
Well, I mean, lazy has a sort of moral judgment attached to it, but biologically, yes, it's really all about efficiency. And to achieve that efficiency, level 1 cognition relies heavily on mental shortcuts.
Okay.
In behavioral economics, these shortcuts are called heuristics. A heuristic is essentially just an unconscious rule of thumb.
Okay, let's make that concrete for everyone listening. Let's say I'm a hiring manager, right? And I'm trying to fill a role really quickly. My level 1 heuristic might just be, oh, I'll just hire someone who went to the exact same university I did because I know that curriculum is tough.
Yes, perfect example.
So I'm not actually evaluating the candidate's specific merits for the role. I'm just substituting a really complex question, which is, who is the best fit? With a much simpler question, does this person share my background?
That is a textbook heuristic. And the thing is, it works like 90% of the time. The person gets hired, the job gets done, and you just saved yourself days of agonizing cognitive labor.
Right, to save the energy.
Exactly. But that 10% of the time when the heuristic fails, that is where systemic bias comes from. That's where terrible hires and massive strategic blunders happen.
Yeah.
The issue really isn't that level 1 cognition exists. The issue is that it operates completely under the radar. Unconscious biases influence our decisions because these heuristics bypass our critical faculties entirely.
So if level 1 is this fast, automatic, energy-saving system running on heuristics, where does metacognition actually live? Like, what is the alternative here?
So metacognition resides primarily in the prefrontal cortex. This is the more recently evolved part of the human brain, and it's responsible for complex planning, impulse control, and self-regulation.
Eye-level stuff.
Exactly. If level 1 is the reactive survival brain just blindly pulling levers, metacognition is like the supervisor standing behind it, actively observing the reactions and questioning them. It is the real-time monitoring of your own cognitive processes.
Okay, I see.
And the literature generally breaks this down into a 4-phase cycle. It's planning, monitoring, evaluating, and reflecting.
Planning, monitoring, evaluating, and reflecting. I feel like a lot of corporate training really focuses heavily on the first and the last ones. The planning and evaluating.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you set the KPIs at the start of the quarter, and then you do a performance review at the end.
Yeah.
But that middle part, the monitoring, that seems to be where the actual real agility happens.
It is the most critical phase, and honestly, it's the most neglected. Because monitoring means actually tracking your progress in your own mental state while you are actively engaged in the task.
While you're in it.
Yeah. It's pausing mid-meeting and asking yourself, am I dominating this conversation right now because my idea is objectively better? Or am I dominating it because I felt threatened by the junior associate's comment 5 minutes ago?
Oh, well, yeah. That is real-time self-regulation.
Exactly. And then the final phase, reflecting, connects the end back to the beginning. It turns what would be a linear process into a loop, which creates a self-correcting system.
But here is the friction I'm seeing in the source material. They introduce this concept called cognitive entrenchment. And this seems to be the ultimate villain of the metacognitive process.
A big bad villain, yes.
Right, but it's strange, because the word entrenchment usually implies being stuck. How does becoming an expert actually make you worse at this process?
It is the great paradox of expertise, and it's just fascinating. So cognitive entrenchment is this phenomenon where extremely high levels of domain expertise actually prevent you from recognizing shifting paradigms.
Prevent you?
Yeah. Think about it. When you spend 20 years mastering a specific field, your heuristics become incredibly dense and complex. You become brilliantly efficient at solving problems the exact way they have always been solved.
Right.
But that deep, specialized knowledge eventually solidifies into a set of blinkers.
I see. So because your autopilot is so highly calibrated and successful, you literally never feel the need to turn it off. You are just seduced by your own track record of success.
That's exactly it. You lose the cognitive agility to perceive when the foundational rules of the game have actually changed. You are so busy playing the game perfectly that you don't even realize someone flipped the board over.
Let me try an analogy here and see if this captures the mechanics of entrenchment, because I think this is so vital for anyone listening who considers themselves a senior professional.
Go for it.
Imagine you're driving home from work, and it's a route you've taken every single day for 10 years. You know every pothole, you know every stoplight, every little shortcut.
Right, muscle memory.
Exactly. You get in the car, and you completely zone out. Your level 1 cognition just handles the pedals and the steering wheel using heuristics. And suddenly, you're pulling into your driveway, and you literally have absolutely no memory of the 20-minute drive.
Oh, yeah, highway hypnosis. It's a very common experience. Total autopilot.
Right. And for a normal daily commute, that efficiency is wonderful. It saves mental energy for more important things, like planning your evening.
Sure.
But what if, due to a massive storm, a bridge on that route has completely collapsed? If you are a novice driver who doesn't really know the route, you are hyper-aware. Your prefrontal cortex is fully engaged. You're reading the warning signs, you see the road barricades, and you stop. But if you are suffering from cognitive entrenchment, you are just so confident in your internal map that you ignore the external environment entirely. You just drive right through the barricades and off the cliff purely because that road has always taken you home safely before.
The collapsed bridge is the absolute perfect metaphor for this. And if you look at the broader economic landscape right now,
Hmm.
modern industries are just littered with collapsed bridges disguised as normal
Oh,
roads.
totally.
Things like disruptive generative AI or sudden shifts in global supply chains, radical changes in consumer behavior, these are the collapsed bridges. And the entrenched leader sees the AI disruption, and their expertise tells them to just keep their foot on the gas. They say, oh, we'll just outwork the algorithm, because working harder has always been their successful heuristic.
It's actually a terrifying thought,
Hmm.
because what we are really delineating here is the profound difference between knowing a subject, like mastering the content, and understanding how you process that subject. The content expert knows the route perfectly, but the metacognitive thinker is constantly monitoring the process of driving, right? They're actively looking for the anomalies. Let's make sure we repeat that term for our learners tuning in. Cognitive entrenchment. You definitely want to write that one down.
Yes, cognitive entrenchment. It's a powerful phrase.
And this brings us to an issue of scale. Because it's one thing when an individual driver goes off a cliff, but what happens when cognitive entrenchment infects an entire global corporation?
Oh, that's when it gets really dramatic.
When a whole leadership team, composed of brilliant experts, loses its metacognitive awareness and just descends into this highly efficient, highly confident groupthink.
Well, that transitions us perfectly into our first major case study.
Let's do it. Let's look at the price of failing to pivot on a massive macro scale. We need to talk about BlackBerry.
Yes. The rise and fall of BlackBerry is arguably the most potent modern example of corporate cognitive entrenchment. Just for some context for our listeners, prior to 2007, BlackBerry essentially owned the entire corporate communications space. They were everything. Their product was an absolute status symbol, and they had achieved this dominance through highly effective heuristics. They built these phenomenal tactile, physical keyboards that made emailing effortless, and they built an impenetrable, secure network that IT departments just adored.
So they were the undisputed experts. Their level one cognition was generating billions of dollars in revenue. They knew exactly how to drive their route.
Exactly. But then the paradigm shifted. In 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone, and this was the collapsed bridge.
Yeah.
The iPhone didn't have a physical keyboard. It wasn't marketed to corporate IT departments. It was marketed directly to regular consumers who wanted a sleek interface, a large touch screen, and media capabilities.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate and push back on the critique of BlackBerry for just a moment here. Because if you look at it from their perspective in 2007, wasn't it actually entirely rational for them to dismiss the iPhone?
How so?
Well, touchscreens back then were notoriously clunky. And the battery life on the early iPhone was terrible compared to a BlackBerry. And the security was completely unproven. So if you are a legitimate expert in mobile communications, your data tells you the iPhone is just an inferior corporate tool.
You are absolutely right, and that is exactly the insidious nature of cognitive entrenchment.
Really?
Yes. Because it doesn't look like stupidity from the inside, it looks like rigorous logic. BlackBerry evaluated the iPhone entirely through the lens of their existing blinkers.
Ah.
They assumed that professional utility things like typing speed and battery life would forever remain the dominant metrics of success. They literally couldn't conceive that the very definition of a smartphone was fundamentally changing from a secure email machine into a mobile entertainment and lifestyle hub.
Wow. So they were trapped in their own rigid definition of success.
Mm-hmm.
And the source materials draw a really sharp line here between what they call reactive thinking and adaptive thinking. Can you break down the mechanics of those two modes for us?
Sure. Reactive thinking is basically a delayed response. It is the act of adjusting your strategy only after a catastrophic failure has already occurred.
So it's hitting the bottom of the ravine and realizing, oh, the bridge was out.
Exactly. BlackBerry engaged in reactive thinking. They only really tried to build a competitive touchscreen phone years later when their market share was already evaporating.
And adaptive thinking.
Adaptive thinking is proactive. It requires continuous environmental auditing during execution. It's noticing that consumer sentiment is shifting slightly, recognizing the potential threat of the App Store ecosystem, and consciously deciding to pivot before the disaster actually hits.
And the mechanism required to switch from that reactive mode to the adaptive mode is what the researchers call the strategic pause.
Yes. The strategic pause is the behavioral manifestation of metacognition. It is the conscious, deliberate act of interrupting your autopilot.
How does that look in reality?
Well, in a boardroom setting, it literally means stopping the momentum of a decision and asking the room, are we reacting based on the fact that this worked for us in 2005, or are we responding to the actual unvarnished data sitting in front of us today? What assumptions are we making about this new touchscreen technology that we haven't actively verified?
I can just imagine the incredible friction of trying to introduce a strategic pause in a corporate culture that only rewards speed and execution.
It's very difficult.
But this actually presents a fantastic opportunity for our learners.
Mm-hmm.
I want to examine how professionals construct language in English to analyze these exact types of historical failures. Because when a leader or an analyst looks back at BlackBerry, they don't just say, oh, they made a bad choice.
No, they don't.
Right? They utilize a very specific grammar of reflection to explore the mechanics of the failure.
Yeah, the language we use to dissect failure really dictates what we actually learn from it. And in advanced English, we see the frequent use of a structure called speculative inversion.
Speculative inversion.
It's an elegant, highly formal way to express a conditional reality about the past.
Right. And it essentially forces the speaker and the listener to engage in metacognition. So instead of using a standard conditional phrase like, if the BlackBerry executives had taken a strategic pause, the company might have survived.
Which is perfectly fine, but common.
Exactly. Instead of that, you invert the subject and the auxiliary verb, and you drop the word if entirely. So a professional would say, should the leadership have utilized a strategic pause, the mobile landscape might look entirely different today.
Or, had they audited their assumptions, they would have recognized the consumer shift.
Had they audited their assumptions.
Notice the subtle psychological difference there. When you say, should they have utilized a strategic pause, it really elevates the discourse.
Yeah.
It signals that you are not merely pointing fingers and assigning blame. You are conducting a forensic analysis of the cognitive failure itself.
Yeah.
It demonstrates to your peers that you understand that different inputs lead to different outputs.
It sounds so authoritative, but it also literally slows the brain down. Because you have to physically concentrate to construct that sentence properly, which is like a micro-strategic pause in itself.
Precisely. Language shapes thought.
Okay, so we've looked at the corporate manifestation of entrenchment. And losing billions of dollars in market dominance is obviously a tragedy for shareholders. But the sources provide a second case study that really pulls this out of the boardroom and places it in a visceral physical environment.
This is where it gets real.
Yeah. This proves that metacognition is not just a buzzword for middle managers. It is a primal human survival tool. Let's look at the story of Wag Dodge and the Mann Gulch fire.
So the Mann Gulch fire forces us to confront the extreme limits of the human mind under pressure. We need to set the scene. It's August 1949, Montana. A team of 15 elite smoke jumpers. And these are highly specialized firefighters who literally parachute into rugged, inaccessible terrain. They are dropped into Mann Gulch.
Just a steep, rocky canyon.
Exactly. And at first it looks like a standard, manageable fire. But within minutes, the wind shifts violently. The fire jumps the gulch. And suddenly, a wall of flame is racing up this incredibly steep slope directly toward them. And it's moving faster than any human being can sprint.
The crew is totally trapped. They turn around and run for the ridge, sprinting for their lives in heavy boots. And they are carrying axes, crosscut saws, and massive packs.
Now, the roar of a fire like that literally consumes the oxygen in the air. Survivors say it sounds like a freight train bearing down on you. Absolute pure terror.
And here's where the story defies all logic. The foreman of the crew, a man named Wag Dodge, realizes they aren't going to make it. They can't outrun it. So he stops running. With the fire bearing down on him, he takes out a match, strikes it, and sets the dry grass directly in front of him on fire.
Which seems crazy.
It does. He lets it burn a circle, and then he steps into the smoldering ashes of the fire he just created. He lies face down. He yells at his men to join him in the ashes, and he screams at them to drop their heavy tools so they can move faster.
But they don't listen.
They don't. They ignore him completely. They keep running up the hill, still clutching their heavy chainsaws and axes. Wag Dodge survives because the main fire passes completely around the patch of earth he had already burned. It had no fuel left there.
Yeah.
But the other men, clutching the tools that were literally weighing them down, they perish in the fire. Only 2 others survive by finding a crevice in the rocks. So the question is, Why did 14 men keep running to their deaths carrying 30-pound axes while one man stopped and essentially invented a completely new way to survive?
Right, because it clearly wasn't about physical speed.
Not at all. It was entirely about how Wag Dodge managed the machinery of his own mind in a moment of ultimate crisis. I want you to put us inside the minds of those 14 men who kept running. What is physically happening to their cognitive processing when they hear a fire roaring up the hill behind them?
It is a complete amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the part of the brain that processes fear and immediate threat. And under extreme threat, it essentially bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the metacognitive center, entirely. It just sends all the body's energy directly to the motor functions.
Just run.
Right. The heart rate spikes to perhaps 180 beats per minute. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. In this state, complex reasoning degrades severely. Your field of vision actually physically narrows. You get tunnel vision. The only directive in your brain is move away from the threat.
So when Wag Dodge stops running, takes out a match, and starts lighting the grass on fire, to a brain that is completely hijacked by panic, he just looks like a madman.
He looks completely insane to them. Their heuristics are screaming, fire is the enemy, run from fire, and here is their leader standing still, creating more fire.
Right.
They simply lacked the cognitive bandwidth in that moment to process the brilliant utility of his action.
Yeah.
They couldn't pause to understand that he was creating a fuel-free zone.
It's astounding that Dodge was able to maintain his prefrontal cortex function in that environment. But, the detail that haunts me the most is the tools.
Yes.
Dodge yelled at them to drop their heavy packs, their axes, and their saws. The two men who survived said later that they distinctly heard him say it, but the bodies of the victims were found still clutching this incredibly heavy equipment. Why? Why wouldn't you drop a 30-pound saw when you're trying to sprint up a 76-degree incline to save your life?
This is where we hit the deepest, most profound layer of cognitive entrenchment. It's the conflict between utility and identity.
Utility and identity.
Yeah. To an outsider, to you or me, an axe is just a piece of metal and wood. It has utility. It cuts trees. When you don't need to cut trees, you drop it.
Simple.
But to a smoke jumper in 1949, that axe is not a tool. It is the physical manifestation of their professional identity.
It's literally who they are. You are an elite firefighter because you carry the axe into the fire.
Yes. Their entire training, their pride, their sense of self-worth was intrinsically tied to their ability to carry that heavy gear into hostile environments and fight. So dropping the tools wasn't just a physical act, it felt like a psychological surrender.
Wow.
It felt like an absolute abandonment of their identity, a violation of their core purpose. Under extreme stress, when the brain is desperate for anything familiar and grounding, we cling violently to our identities. We grip our tools tighter.
The psychological terror of dropping the tools was somehow greater than the physical terror of the approaching fire.
Yeah.
That is just chilling. And I think it forces a very profound reflection for anyone listening to this deep dive right now.
Absolutely.
We don't fight wildfires, obviously, but we all carry tools. So, listener, what are the tools in your professional life that have shifted from utility to identity?
That is the essential question to ask yourself.
Maybe it's a specific software system that you learned a decade ago. You are the master of it. People come to you for help with it. If the company moves to a new system, you aren't just losing a piece of software. You are losing your status as the expert.
Oh, that happens all the time.
Or maybe it's a management style, like a command and control, top-down approach that worked brilliantly for you early in your career. But now you are managing younger generations who respond much better to collaborative leadership. But you just refuse to change. You are clutching the axe while the talent literally leaves your team.
Or even consider a corporate brand identity. A company that built its name on exclusivity and high prices, suddenly facing a market that demands accessibility and transparency. Clinging to the old brand identity is clutching the tools in the fire.
But let me play devil's advocate again here. Isn't there a real danger in dropping your tools too early? Like, what if the crisis is temporary and you throw away the very skills and assets that made you successful in the first place? How do you know when dropping the tools is an act of metacognitive brilliance, like Wag Dodge, versus just an act of premature panic?
That is a phenomenal question. And it highlights exactly why the strategic pause is not just a one-time event, but a continuous cycle. You don't drop your tools arbitrarily.
Right.
You drop them only after executing a rapid evaluation of the new environment. Wag Dodge didn't just throw his tools away the moment he smelled smoke. He evaluated the slope, He calculated the wind speed, he estimated the fuel density of the grass, and he realized the mathematical impossibility of outrunning the fire. Only then did he abandon the old strategy.
Ah,
It requires a brutally honest audit of the external reality, completely divorced from your own ego.
okay, so this brings us to the operational reality of all this. We've seen the macro failure of BlackBerry and the visceral survival story of Mann Gulch.
Hmm.
And both of these hinge on this ability to step outside yourself and monitor your own cognitive machinery.
Yes.
But how do we actually cultivate this? Because I don't want to just hope that in a moment of crisis, my prefrontal cortex will magically activate. How do highly effective leaders build this self-correcting system into a daily routine?
Well, for this, the sources provide a direct window into executive coaching. We have a very detailed methodology from Dr. Elena Vance.
Right, the executive coach.
Yes, and she's a coach who works specifically with C-suite leaders who are highly susceptible to cognitive entrenchment. Her primary mechanism for building metacognition is a practice she calls the decision log, or metacognitive journaling.
You know, I have to admit, when I first read the word journaling, my own heuristics fired off immediately. My level 1 brain just said, journaling. I barely have time to clear my inbox, and you want me to write a diary about my feelings.
Yeah.
It just sounds a bit, I don't know, soft for the cutthroat world of executive leadership. But she specifically distinguishes this from standard diary keeping, doesn't she?
She draws a very, very sharp line. Standard journaling is an external record of events. Like you write, we had a strategy meeting today, we decided to delay the product launch, the marketing team was unhappy.
Right.
That is a chronicle of what happened. Metacognitive journaling, on the other hand, is completely internalized. It is a forensic exploration of how your brain processed the event. You are not recording the decision itself. You are mapping the cognitive architecture behind the decision.
And she forces her clients to answer 3 very specific questions to build this map. I want to break these down because they represent different tiers of cognitive awareness. Question number 1 is, what was my emotional state when I made this choice?
Right. Dr. Vance notes that this question targets level 2 awareness. And you might wonder, why is emotion the starting point?
Exactly why.
Because our emotional state is the invisible hand that guides our heuristics. We like to think of ourselves as purely rational actors in business, but neurobiology tells us otherwise.
Yeah.
If you are exhausted, if you feel threatened by a peer, if you are overly euphoric from a recent win, your level 1 cognition will deploy entirely different shortcuts.
So if I go into a budget meeting and I'm feeling deeply insecure because my department missed its quarterly target, I'm probably going to process every single question about my budget as a personal attack.
Exactly. Your heuristic instantly becomes defensive. Protect my turf. By forcing an executive to explicitly write down, I was feeling defensive and insecure during that discussion, you take that invisible emotional driver and drag it out into the light.
You make it visible.
Yes. You move it from the unconscious amygdala into the conscious prefrontal cortex where it can finally be managed. You cannot regulate a bias you refuse to acknowledge.
Which leads directly to question number 2. What assumption am I making that I haven't verified?
This targets level 4 regulation. This is really the primary weapon against cognitive entrenchment. An assumption is simply a heuristic that you haven't bothered to fact-check recently.
Okay.
Think back to BlackBerry. The fatal, unverified assumption was corporate users will prioritize physical keyboards over touchscreens forever. That was true in 2005. It was an unverified assumption in 2008.
So if the CEO of BlackBerry had been forced to write that assumption down every Friday and ask, have I seen hard data proving this is still true today, the cognitive blinkers might have cracked.
Exactly. Metacognitive journaling forces an audit of your foundational logic. It forces you to ask, is the bridge still there?
What assumption am I making that I haven't verified? That is just a brilliant question to ask your team before hitting send on any major proposal. Yeah. But question number 3 is the one that really demands maximum cognitive agility. Dr. Vance calls it level 5 metacognition. If I were my own competitor, how would I exploit this decision?
Oh, this is the pinnacle of the exercise. Because it requires a complete detachment from your own identity. You have to literally put down the axe entirely.
Yeah.
You have to construct a mental simulation where you view your own brilliant strategy through the eyes of someone who actively desires your destruction. It is incredibly difficult to do because it requires you to actively look for your own weaknesses.
It's like Wag Dodge, looking at the wall of fire and simulating how the fire consumes fuel rather than just acting like a victim of the fire.
Precisely. If you decide to delay a product launch to perfect the features, and you ask how would my competitor exploit this, you might immediately realize, oh, they will launch their inferior product tomorrow, capture all the media attention, and define the market standard before we even arrive.
Right.
That level of objective adversarial evaluation is almost impossible to achieve when you are all wrapped up in the pride of your own work.
The source material shares a really specific anecdote about a tech CEO working with Dr. Vance that perfectly illustrates the pain and the value of this journaling. Let's unpack his story.
Sure. So this CEO was diligently keeping his decision log, reviewing his entries over several weeks, and he began to notice a recurring pattern in the emotional state and unverified assumptions columns. He realized that he was consistently rebuffing innovative AI-driven project proposals that were brought to him by his younger engineers.
Let me just pause here quickly because rebuffing is an excellent B2C1 vocabulary word that our learners should definitely note down. To rebuff an idea doesn't just mean to say no. It implies a blunt, abrupt, almost defensive rejection. You push the idea away ungraciously.
Yes, it's a very active defensive dismissal. He wasn't just declining the ideas nicely, he was killing them quickly. But through the journaling process, answering the question about his emotional state, he had a severe metacognitive breakthrough.
What did he realize?
He realized he wasn't rebuffing these proposals because they lacked business merit. He was killing them because he didn't fully understand the underlying AI technology.
Oh, so his emotional state was actually insecurity.
Deep, deep insecurity. His entire professional identity, his tool, was being the smartest person in the room. He was the visionary founder who understood every single line of code. These new AI proposals threatened that identity.
Wow.
His level 1 survival brain was protecting his ego by neutralizing the threat, and it disguised it as executive decision-making.
So his cognitive entrenchment was literally just a defense mechanism for his ego.
Exactly. And Dr. Vance notes that this realization, as painful as it was for him to admit, was worth more to the company than millions of dollars spent on external strategy consultants.
Because he fixed the root cause.
Yes. Because once he saw the mechanic of his own bias, once he made the invisible process visible, he could finally regulate it. He could consciously pause in the next meeting, recognize that spike of insecurity in his chest, and choose to put on a different hat. He turned his mental process into a self-correcting system.
Okay, so journaling is incredibly potent for the individual. It forces the strategic pause in isolation. But let's look at the reality of the modern workplace. Most of us do not make decisions in a vacuum.
No, we don't.
We operate in cross-functional teams, crowded boardrooms, and endless video calls.
Yeah.
How do you actually scale metacognition to a group of 12 people? Because you can have one leader who journals beautifully, but if the broader team culture is completely entrenched in groupthink, you still end up driving off a cliff together.
Scaling this is the ultimate leadership challenge. Because group dynamics naturally favor cohesion over friction, which just accelerates groupthink. People want to agree.
Right.
To counteract this, you have to institutionalize metacognition. You have to build structures that literally force the team to take a strategic pause together. The sources outline 2 highly effective operationalized frameworks for team metacognition. The first is the pre-mortem reflection.
Now, I think everyone is pretty familiar with a post-mortem. A project wraps up, it didn't hit its targets, and you all sit in a depressing meeting trying to figure out who dropped the ball. That is classic reactive thinking.
It is entirely reactive, and it is usually clouded by intense defensive posturing. A pre-mortem radically alters the timeline and the psychology of the evaluation.
How does it work?
Well, before a project ever launches, before any capital is actually deployed, the project leader gathers the entire team and issues a strict mandate. They say, imagine it is exactly 1 year from today. This project has launched, and it has been an absolute, unmitigated disaster. We have failed completely. I want everyone to take 10 minutes and write down exactly why it failed.
I love the mechanics of this because it directly neutralizes what researchers call optimism bias.
Yes, exactly.
Because when a team is launching something new, momentum just takes over. Nobody wants to be the negative person who raises their hand and points out a fatal flaw. You don't want to be the one slowing down the train. But by declaring that the project has already failed in this simulation, you completely change the incentive structure of the room.
You give everyone psychological permission to voice their deepest anxieties and identify those unverified assumptions. The person who was secretly terrified about supply chain bottlenecks is now rewarded for speaking up because they are answering the prompt correctly. You are forcing the entire team to engage in level 5 metacognition, simulating the perspective of a competitor or a hostile market collectively. You are simulating the fire before you ever drop into the canyon.
It's an enforced strategic pause that actually legitimizes doubt. That's powerful.
It really is.
The second framework the sources delve into is a classic from organizational psychology, but examining it through a metacognitive lens really reveals why it works so well. And that is Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats.
The 6 hats framework is fundamentally a tool for dismantling cognitive entrenchment in real time, because in a standard meeting, people just argue from their entrenched positions.
Right, the finance director argues about cost, the creative director argues about vision.
Exactly, they just smash their heuristics against each other. The 6 hats protocol forces everyone to abandon their default identity and adopt specific, artificially constrained cognitive perspectives. You literally, or metaphorically, wear a hat that dictates exactly how you are allowed to think for the next 10 minutes.
Let's break the mechanics of the colors down because it's a really brilliant blueprint for structural agility.
Okay, let's start with the blue hat. This is the overarching control mechanism. The blue hat is pure metacognition. When the team wears the blue hat, they are not discussing the problem itself. They are discussing how they are going to discuss the problem. Like, what is our agenda? What hats do we need to wear today to solve this? It manages the cognitive process.
Okay, makes sense. Then you have the white hat. This one is strictly facts, data, and information. No interpretation, no opinions allowed. Just what data do we possess and what data are we missing? It forces the team to separate objective reality from their assumptions.
Then comes a very difficult one for corporate environments, the red hat. The red hat legitimizes emotion and intuition. It requires participants to state exactly how they feel without needing to logically justify it. So you might say, my gut tells me this timeline is dangerous, or I feel resentful about this new policy.
Which connects directly back to Dr. Vance's individual journaling. You have to put the emotional state on the table so the team can see the invisible drivers.
Exactly.
If the sales director is secretly terrified of the new product, that fear will sabotage the rollout. The red hat brings it to the prefrontal cortex of the whole group.
Precisely. And once emotions are aired, you can safely move to the black hat. This is the hat of critical judgment, risk assessment, and caution. What are the legal liabilities? Where are the absolute weaknesses? It is essentially the hat you wear during a pre-mortem.
And conversely, you follow it with the yellow hat, which is the hat of optimistic exploration. What are the best-case scenarios? What are the hidden benefits of this approach?
And finally, the green hat. This is pure generative creativity. What are the alternative solutions? How can we synthesize these conflicting ideas into something totally novel?
Well, let me stop you here, though, because I can hear the resistance from our listeners who operate in high-pressure, fast-paced environments.
You know what you're going to say.
Right. Sitting in a boardroom where millions of dollars are on the line and saying, okay, everyone, let's put on our yellow hats and be optimistic for 5 minutes. Doesn't that feel incredibly juvenile?
Yeah.
It feels so artificial. If I asked my executive team to do this, they would roll their eyes at me.
They absolutely would roll their eyes. And it is entirely artificial, but that artificiality is the whole point. The friction is a feature, not a bug.
Really?
Yes. When a team operates on a comfortable autopilot, their thinking is invisible, it's chaotic, and it's heavily biased by whoever has the most authority in the room. The artificial constraints of the hats act as a massive, necessary circuit breaker. It forces what researchers call the thinking aloud protocol. By making the exercise explicitly rigid, you force the perpetually negative risk manager to take off their black hat and actively generate optimistic ideas with the yellow hat. You force the visionary CEO to put on the white hat and look only at the brutal, unromantic data.
I see it now. The discomfort is actually the evidence that cognitive entrenchment is being broken. It forces you to drop your tools, even if just for 10 minutes. The finance person has to drop the spreadsheet identity and adopt the creative identity.
Yes. It democratizes the cognitive load and ensures that a problem is evaluated comprehensively rather than just through the lens of the loudest person's default heuristic.
And as we think about how teams evaluate these processes looking backward, let's return to the language of reflection. We discussed speculative inversion earlier. The sources also highlight the importance of using modals of regret when teams conduct audits or postmortems.
Oh, this is crucial. Modals of regret, so using a modal verb plus have, plus a past participle, such as should have, could have, ought to have, these are essential linguistic tools for the metacognitive team. They allow a group to articulate a failure without descending into toxic blame.
Right, so if we look back at the Mann Gulch tragedy, a team practicing metacognitive reflection wouldn't just state the brutal fact. They kept their tools and died.
Yeah.
They would construct the alternative reality. They would say they ought to have dropped their tools the moment Dodge gave the order. Or they should have recognized that the environment had fundamentally changed.
Or, if we are analyzing BlackBerry's downfall, you might say we must not have questioned our initial market assumptions thoroughly enough. We could have pivoted earlier if we had instituted a pre-mortem before dismissing the iPhone.
We could have pivoted earlier.
Right. And these aren't just grammar exercises, they are the linguistic expression of a self-correcting system. When a team leader openly says, we ought to have verified that data, they are acknowledging the failure, identifying the specific cognitive misstep, and encoding a new heuristic for the future. They are demonstrating that failure is a mechanical error to be fixed, not a permanent stain on the team's identity.
The language literally provides the psychological safety to analyze failure objectively. Wow. We have covered a truly massive terrain today regarding the inner workings of our minds.
We really have. We've journeyed from the biological realities of level 1 cognition, that energy-saving, heuristic-driven survival brain that traps us in cognitive entrenchment.
And we analyzed how that very entrenchment blinded the brilliant experts at BlackBerry, preventing them from seeing the collapsed bridge of the smartphone revolution. We walked through the terrifying reality of Mann Gulch, exploring how the conflict between utility and identity makes us clutch our tools even as the fire surrounds us.
And we unpacked the rigorous operational methodologies required to actually fight back. From Dr. Vance's individual metacognitive journaling, auditing those emotional states and unverified assumptions, to scaling that awareness across an entire organization using pre-mortems and the artificial necessary friction of the 6 thinking hats.
It is fundamentally a shift in posture. It's moving from merely reacting to the world to proactively adapting to it, shifting the focus from what you think to actively managing how you think.
The ultimate goal is true cognitive agility.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this deep dive, the invitation is entirely on you, our listener. If you want to practice the thinking aloud protocol with your team, or if you want to master the elegant precision of speculative inversion or the reflective power of modals of regret that we've modeled today, you really need to head over to Fluentora.com.
Because merely understanding these concepts is only level 3 awareness. The true value is in application. Translating theory into daily practice is how you forge true cognitive and linguistic agility.
Precisely. If this exploration shifted your perspective today, or if it made you uncomfortably aware of a few heavy tools you are currently dragging around your office, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the show. Send this to a colleague who might need a gentle reminder to drop their tools before the market shifts on them.
Definitely do that.
We have a fascinating lineup of deep dives coming up that will continue to probe the intersection of psychology, strategy, and advanced communication.
But before we sign off, there is one final really provocative thread in the source material regarding the future of work that we haven't touched on yet. And it revolves around artificial intelligence.
Oh, this is the perfect thought experiment to leave everyone with. We are entering an era where AI is rapidly assuming control of massive swaths of professional output. Think about what AI actually does well. It executes level 1 cognition with terrifying brilliance.
It really does.
It can process unfathomable amounts of data, deploy complex heuristics, and generate efficient answers faster than any human brain ever could.
It is the ultimate autopilot. But metacognition, the profound ability to step back, to audit the emotional context of a decision, to challenge underlying biases, to adopt a contrary viewpoint, and to understand the human why behind an action that still requires a human in the loop.
Yeah.
An algorithm cannot yet experience the insecurity of an executive, nor can it truly simulate the ethical nuances of a shifting corporate identity.
So, as you navigate your career this week, consider this. As AI increasingly commoditizes standard reactive thinking, will metacognition, the messy, difficult, conscious act of thinking about your thinking, become the single most valuable, irreplaceable human skill left in the marketplace? Will your ultimate professional value no longer be rooted in the tools you know how to use, but in your ability to know exactly when it's time to drop them?
That is the big question.
Think about it the next time you find yourself cruising on autopilot. Are you driving safely, or are you speeding toward a collapsed bridge? Drop your tools. Take a breath. We'll see you next time.